Thank you all for being here today, virtually, of course, where you can sit in your pajamas and no one knows if you've showered or even brushed your teeth yet today. So thanks to the CFCA for having me. Anytime I can talk about the customer experience, I take that chance. So today what we're going to talk about is how knowing your customer and using their feedback can create a meaningful experience from sales to support and everything in between, including fraud prevention, mitigation, and all of that good stuff. So I'm gonna, actually, I just wanted to show my face for just a minute, but I'm gonna stop showing my face so that it's not distracting, because at any minute, someone's gonna come through that door, some kind of animal or human being, and it's just gonna be distracting for everyone. So here's a little bit about me. Why do you care about listening to me, and what could I possibly have to offer at this session? And so I kind of put this together to tell you a little bit, and I know Sarah kind of went over some of that. I consider myself to be passionate, knowledgeable, and intuitive about the customer experience, and you can see that I've been doing this for some time, but things change quickly in my field. So I'm regularly attending workshops and webinars, talking to other customer experience leaders around the globe, reading their articles, listening to their podcasts, you name it, I've probably got my hands in it. Also that I can kind of stay up to date with all the different trends and things that are going on. I've always been in customer service and customer experience in one way or another, and in fact, we all are. Your customer might be a coworker, or maybe it's a partner or a vendor, but we all have a customer, we all are a customer, and we're all responsible for our customers, which is why it's so important to learn about this topic. Many years ago, I learned about customer experience management when it wasn't really much of a thing, or at least it wasn't being talked about quite as much as it is today. And you know, people were always sending out surveys and things like that. You know, that's not anything new. People have been doing that for a long time, but there was never really a major process designed around it up until the last maybe 15 years or so. And I was given the opportunity to dig into this many years ago and realize very quickly how much of an impact we can make on our customers if we understand the psychology behind what we do and how it impacts them. So one little thing you might have noticed here in my presentation is my obsession with this cookie place called Crumble. This cookie shop is near me, and they feature these cookies that are like almost the size of my head. And every Monday they come out with 4 new flavors. So Crumble, kind of like a magic 8-ball, decides in every week if I'm getting a workout for that week. So if this cookie selection has 2 or more cookies that I like, I buy them and I work out. And if it's only 1 cookie or maybe no cookies that I'm not really fond of, then I don't work out. So I let Crumble guide me in every week in my physical fitness. If you have a Crumble near you, you will not be disappointed if you like cookies anyway. And no, I was not paid for that advertisement. Okay, let's move along. Our agenda today, we're going to cover first what CX or customer experience is, because most people aren't really too sure. We'll dive into surveys and how we use them to gather data and other feedback from our customers. And then we'll move into what we do with all of that juicy data and feedback as we discuss customer experience management. And then we'll move into the ever so hot topic and the meat of this whole presentation, fraud, and how it intersects with the customer experience, how and why it's important to know your customer. And finally, we'll wrap up with how to move forward and collaborate in the industry to meet fraud head on. So what is the customer experience? Simply put, it's everything that surrounds your customer. So some people think that this is just a department in your company, and typically they think that this is like your frontline support team, but that's not the case. Customer experience involves everyone and everything, and it should be viewed as a whole company approach to product, service, support, everything. It can start from the moment your customer visits your website, and it continues even through the end of their experience with you. And yes, we do have a responsibility to provide a great experience, even if your customer is choosing to leave. Customer experience works even when you're not physically working, because it's tied to your website and your portal products, applications, all of the things that your customers are using that don't necessarily require any interaction from you. So everyone in your company has a responsibility to provide a good experience to your customers. A way that I sometimes explain what I do is that I'm the person behind the scenes kind of pulling the strings to make things move. And I do this by collecting lots and lots of information about our customers and their experience. And one of the ways I do this is through our surveys. Measuring the customer experience is most often done in these two ways. This would be Net Promoter Score surveys and CSAT surveys. There are other methods of measuring the customer experience, but these are the most widely used, the most accepted, and the most known. And now, these are both surveys that go to your customer, and the surveys both ask your customer to answer a simple question, but they're scored and handled a little bit differently. And so I've kind of put that information here for you. Your Net Promoter Score measures more of a long-term loyalty through your customers' perceptions. So this is more of like something that you would send out at specific intervals. Maybe some people do it just they just send one on an annual basis, or you can send it at very specific parts of your customer's journey. So for example, right after they onboard with you, or after they port in bulk numbers or something along those lines. The scoring for NPS is calculated as an absolute number that goes from anywhere from a -100 to a +100. And I'm going to give you a little bit of an idea of that on the next page. Your customers in an NPS survey are categorized as promoters, detractors, and passives. And now on the other side, we have CSAT, which is customer satisfaction. And this measures more of a short-term loyalty. This is based on transactions. So it's a little more in a real-time sense. You're capturing something. So a transaction meaning you open a ticket because you're having troubles with your phone calls, and then someone works that ticket and they close it out. That's a transaction. You open a ticket for porting numbers, or for an issue you're having with an invoice, something like that, and someone helps you with that. Those are transactions, and that's typically when a CSAT survey is sent out. The satisfaction scale here is a simple 1 to 5, and then the scoring goes from a 0 to a 100%. Your customers in this type of survey are categorized as satisfied, neutral, and unsatisfied. And here's an example of what each of these surveys might look like. On the left, we see the NPS survey, where you can see the question being asked, or at least I hope you can see that. That might be kind of small, but it says, how likely are you to recommend Inteliquent to a friend or colleague? Obviously, this wouldn't be Inteliquent for everybody, but it could be your company name or a product or something along those lines. And then they have a rating scale of 0 through 10, 0 meaning not likely, 10 being extremely likely. Now, we kind of talked about the scoring a little bit on the last slide, but this gives you a good visual representation. Those who score 9s and 10s are your sweet spot. These are your promoters. These are happy and engaged people and would likely very happily recommend your company to others. So you can feel confident that as long as these folks are happy, they'll stay with you for a while. 0 through 6 are what we call detractors, and these are people who are not happy and their long-term loyalty with your company is at risk. And these are people who might be out there giving you negative reviews on social media. And finally, 7 and 8 are the people we call passive. These are the ones who are generally undecided or on the fence. Excuse me. Oddly enough, when determining your score for NPS, the calculation takes your percentage of promoters and it subtracts the percentage of your detractors, coming up with an absolute score of negative 100 to a positive 100. And so I've kind of included this little visual representation of what that calculation looks like. You can kind of see here that the promoters in green, they kind of trickle down to the bottom, and then your detractors in red, they kind of trickle down to the bottom. And these passive folks here, they're just kind of there. They're still considered in the calculation in terms of, you have to know how many total number of people responded to get a true calculation. But when you're getting your score, it's only the promoters and the detractors that are helping to actually calculate the score. And on the other side, we have our CSAT survey. And in this example, you can see that it highlights a case number and subject, so it kind of helps the customer to have a recollection of the transaction. And it asks the customer how their experience was with Susan. You can kind of see that at the bottom, who was the person who helped them with this request. So this is sent out, like I said, in almost a real-time fashion. For us, we send the survey out about a day after the transaction closed. And so here on this side, the customer chooses a smiley face to describe their experience. Now, you can do this a number of ways. You can do a ranking where it literally says very satisfied all the way to very unsatisfied. You can have a number ranking like the NPS. We chose, we actually have 2 versions of this, and this is one of them. We chose the smiley faces. And so each smiley face represents a number. So that mean red guy over there, he's very unsatisfied. He could probably use a crumble cookie right now. And then it goes all the way up to the guy in the green with the cute little heart eyes. And on this one, you calculate it by taking your positive responses, so the 4s and 5s, and you divide that by the total number of responses that you receive, and this gives you a satisfaction score as a percentage. So you might be asking, Suze, that's well and good, but what the heck are you going to do with all of that information? And this is where customer experience management comes into play, and this is what I do. I take all of this survey data and customer feedback, which, by the way, mostly comes from our surveys, but also comes from other sources like from our teams directly and sometimes through social media campaigns or other methods. And I take this information and I transform it into some of the things that you see listed here. And this is not an exhaustive list, but it does give you an idea of all the different things you can do with your customer feedback. So these aren't things that I'm doing as a lone ranger. All of these things are done in unison with other people in the company. So I mentioned before that I'm kind of like a behind the scenes person pulling strings, but I can't create and execute a program for a team without them buying into it and helping to put it into practice. So the key thing about customer experience management, and I'm going to say it again because it's really important, is that it's a whole company approach, meaning customer experience is everyone's job. So I have to create relationships with my peers and build trust with them so that they understand why we need to make the changes that I'm requesting. And so customer experience management is a lot of influential leadership backed by powerful data, customer feedback, trust, and collaboration. I apologize for my throat. It's a little sore today. So looking at this list, you can see that my reach also expands into the employee experience and employee engagement. And that's because when you have a team of people who are happy and feel like they're taken care of, they'll work hard to take care of your customers. And this is something that's been proven time and time again. It's actually a very big factor in creating great experiences for your customers. So For training and workshops, for example, this expands into our staff receiving outside training for skills certifications to employees building their own internal training programs as a way of providing knowledge sharing experiences. And it goes into even our customers attending workshops on our products. We create programs that help define our processes, that help to discover and fill any gaps, and create experiences for our customers and team members that they're asking for. So customer experience is literally everywhere. Okay, now to our main event where fraud and the customer experience intersect. So I love good statistics, and here are a few that I found as they relate to fraud. Now, these don't specifically relate to fraud in telecom or the communications industry as a whole, but fraud in one industry is still fraud in another, and some of the same tactics to prevent and resolve fraud can be applied across the board. And I'm going to show you that, an example of that here in just a minute. The first chart on the left identifies how 84% of businesses believe that if they just knew their customer better, the risk for fraud would be reduced. So one more time, because this is a really big number, 84% of businesses believe that if they just knew their customer better, the risk for fraud would be reduced. So businesses recognize this, and they understand that it's important to know their customer and their identity by means of who they are in the marketplace. The chart on the right shows how only 40% of businesses feel confident in their ability to detect fraud. So 40%, now we're going back to the other side, that's a smaller number. And even if we focus on the larger number in that same graph, we're looking at 50% of people who are only somewhat confident in their ability to detect fraud. So with fraud being an ever-present and growing risk, it's not surprising that pragmatic businesses are focusing more on what they can control and aren't very confident in their ability to address the ever-moving target of fraud detection and prevention. So in other words, they prioritize convenience over security and have come to terms with acceptable levels of loss. And I think a lot of us can probably understand that on some kind of human level. I mean, how often do you choose convenience over doing something that takes either a little more money or a little more time? I mean, for me, I'm not thinking doesn't exactly correlate to fraud, but Grubhub is an example of something like this to me, where there are times that I'm just so lazy that I'll spend twice what I would normally spend on a meal just so I can have it delivered. And to make it worse, I already have food at home. So instead of eating the food that I have, I'm choosing convenience over the loss of money from eating out and having it delivered. So again, I realize the analogy is not synonymous with fraud, but I think it makes a similar point. Businesses will continue to grapple with the tension between managing fraud and maintaining a positive customer experience. And in most cases, the latter wins out, as evidenced by their willingness to accept these higher fraud losses, but to do their best not to disrupt the user experience. So they choose the customer experience over fraud losses, which on the one hand is great because it's great to choose your customer, but at some point, those losses come back as disrupting the customer experience when you think about how you might have to force your customer to pay for that loss, or when the customer experiences fraud themselves, but maybe they believe you to be at fault, whether you are or you aren't. So this balance of preventing fraud and providing a great experience is really a constant tug of war, and I'm sure many of you are well aware of that. And I'm guessing that a lot of people feel like preventing fraud and providing a great customer experience can't cohesively coexist, but they can. So let's talk about some of the steps we can take to help prevent fraud while still providing a great experience, and to help show the intersection between these two. I'm going to use an example that you might not immediately connect as being related. So there have been a number of studies about how physical stores can actually prevent fraud by using specific measures. On the left here, we show some measures that a business can take in a traditional brick and mortar kind of store. So some of those in here is about knowing your customer, building a relationship with them, and even avoiding profiling and stereotyping is actually a big fraud preventer. But there are many other methods to deter it, as you can see listed here. Training, where you put items, or training, I guess, just as a whole, but where you put the items in your store and on your shelves. And then the obvious one of having visible cameras and camera signage. So these are all based on various studies, how stores, physical stores, can prevent fraud. And off to the right, we see that the list is very similar. The obvious differences are in bold, such as physical presence of noticing or making eye contact with your customer. And certainly we can't look them in the eye when we're kind of that digital online style customer. We can't go in there and give them that, people's eyebrow if we think that something fishy is going on. But it shouldn't stop us from engaging with them and building a relationship and getting to know them. Another difference is the signage piece, where in a store, there might be a sign that says, "Smile, you're on camera." But clearly we can't do that in our kind of business. So instead, what we do and what we could do is educate our customers on fraud. And then we use our network monitoring tools to help find the fraud for us. So putting up a sign that says, "We're watching you," is very similar to how we can be inclusive and get our customers to partner with us to understand fraud, to recognize it, prevent it, and then to teach them what to do about it when it occurs. 87% of customers believe in their ability to solve problems on their own. And we can use this as part of our customer experience strategy by asking for feedback on our existing fraud prevention approach. So this helps bring the customer in. It keeps them aware, and it helps them to be part of the solution. I know a lot of customers get really frustrated with fraud, and they expect us and want us to do things that we kind of can't do, but at the end of the day, we really have to kind of collaborate on those things and educate our customers so that we can provide a good experience to them, they can provide a good experience to their customers, and everybody's kind of working together. And then one more item on here is not leaving your merchandise as easy targets. In a physical store, this could mean putting valuable merchandise near the registers where it can be monitored, or maybe aligning your registers or your team members to always be toward the front of the store. In our world, it means not leaving yourself open and vulnerable to these fraudulent attacks. So in other words, don't make it easy for the bad guy to win. So what we've learned is that the importance of customer experience management has increased, but so has fraud and theft prevention for businesses, because these attackers are getting better and better by the day. Preventing fraud and theft is typically a top priority for companies for two main reasons. One is loss of revenue, and two is loss of customer confidence. Once you lose the confidence your customer once had, it's really difficult to get it back. It's similar to any kind of trust situation you would have in your life with friends or family members or spouses. However, sometimes we as businesses make this difficult on ourselves by implementing complicated or outdated fraud prevention measures, which can create frustrations along the customer journey and may completely erode the already good customer experience you might have already built. So how can we balance fraud prevention with a good customer experience to create a frictionless experience? And we can do this many ways, but one of the biggest is by knowing your customer. We can deliver an excellent customer experience if we leave a customer with a positive impression of our brand, products, and services across all stages of their customer journey. And we do this by listening to the voice of the customer and understanding the various touch points they undergo during their customer experience journey. Fraud potentially being one of them. And just to hit home about these touch points and how customer experience is everyone's job and how important it is to make fraud prevention part of your overall tactic, I've included some bullet points on here to kind of illustrate how this impacts everyone and how everyone in the company plays a part. So again, it's not an exhaustive list, but it gives us a good idea. This begins in the sales process, where the salesperson can get to know the customer a little more in depth rather than just putting the customer in a package that seems fitting. And by getting to know the customer in depth, they might unlock the potential for fraudulent activity and can decide whether to accept the deal or accept it with provisions and education. And I think there's a lot of salespeople that probably go through this, where they start to realize what kind of customer they have and what kind of business that they're bringing on board. And so we have to be really aware of these kinds of things. Moving on to onboarding and account management, we see there's training and relationship building going on here. If we uncover in the sales process or even through onboarding that the customer could be risky, we should work to educate the customer about fraud. So if it wasn't caught in sales and you're in onboarding and you realize, oh boy, this customer provides virtual numbers, or they have this particular type of business that sometimes brings fraud into the world that we're going to all be living in, maybe we should sit down with this customer and talk to them about this. And maybe we should educate them on fraud and the kind of things that we look for and what the consequences potentially could be. And this will help hold them accountable and help us all to take steps to identify and to mitigate this. So sort of like how we talked about it on the last slide as to making the customer part of the solution. So finally, we move on to post-onboarding support, where fraud prevention and customer experience are working hand in hand on a regular basis. Continual training for fraud, and not just CP&I, but providing a great experience through a crisis, because oftentimes when fraud hits and large dollars start racking up, people panic. So your customer support teams need to know how to handle a tense situation like that. And then that can also go into network monitoring and reporting, which are both very important for mitigation and education of fraud. So a good customer experience strategy matters as it sustains the growth of your business by encouraging brand loyalty, which increases revenue. And as we can see from the statistic on the side here, a bad customer experience can bring real trouble to your business when you see that 91% of customers will leave without warning if their experience is bad. And understandably, I know a lot of people are under contracts and things like that, but just because they're in a contract with you doesn't mean they couldn't be looking for ways to get out, or that they're already looking for a new provider. So these are good things to keep in mind. Oops. Uh-oh. Hold on. My screen just went off. Hold on. Okay, here we go. Sorry about that. Okay, when I agreed to do this presentation, I had a chat with CFCA's president, Stacy, and we talked about the challenges and struggles from the standpoint of someone who deals with fraud on a regular basis. And one of the things we discussed is how important it is, and almost more importantly, how great it would be if we all could work together on this problem. And then when I was digging up statistics to show you all for this presentation, I came across this one. It's an interesting statistic because it kind of puts fraud in this competition of sorts between the different businesses. More than half of the companies surveyed indicated they'll use fraud detection as a competitive measure. And in contrast, 35% of the companies plan to lead the efforts in fraud detection and mitigation. And so my kind of final thoughts as I wrap up the session is, and it's summed up in this little orange box on the bottom, let's focus on eliminating fraud together instead of celebrating each other's losses and keeping the competition between products and service and customer experience like it should be. And this might not be true for you or for your company, but if it is, maybe we can shift that focus and put our best brains on the job and be one step ahead of the fraud, saving us all some headaches and, of course, providing a great experience.